her first official catch-up with us today as members. So a few members have been asking about the specialisation checklist of recent weeks. Domestic Violence New South Wales created, as part of the Good Practice Guidelines, the specialisation checklist, and we'll throw this in the chat box now. The checklist defines and describes the specialised work of responding to victim survivors of domestic and family violence. The definition and assessment, informed by the Good Practice Guidelines, will really help shape really trauma-informed work and ensure that we're working as well as we can, and also support our government partners in making some really informed decisions about decisions they make when there's funding or what have you, to ensure that that work is safe and trauma-informed. In lieu of quality standards, of course, this resource was developed to support services to self-assess their knowledge, skills and experience, systems, processes, and effectively respond to domestic violence, manage risk, and importantly, avoid doing further harm. As I've just said, we've also shared this resource with our stakeholders at DCJ, and it will help ongoing assessment. You may have also seen in recent weeks that Raylene Hassel joined our team at Domestic Violence New South Wales. She's the Senior Aboriginal Policy Officer and has already supported our team with essential advocacy, particularly core and cluster. And I hope that you caught her daily videos through Reconciliation Week last week. We're so thrilled to have her expertise and support at Domestic Violence New South Wales, and we obviously invite you to meet her at some point too. So if you're interested in catching up for a cuppa and a yarn, do email admin@dvnsw.org.au. I'm sure she'd be really keen to catch up with you all. So further, we provided a submission to the Select Committee on the cost of living. And I want to thank all the members that provided such detailed feedback, which really, really was so qualitative and so helpful for this submission. We commented on how your funding and brokerage just doesn't stretch far enough anymore, and funding has never been in more demand, as well as the current housing crisis, and how many of your clients aren't able to leave a violent situation because this would mean being homeless with their children. So we look forward to sharing the response from the committee when it's released on the 30th of November this year, and we'll keep you posted. And thanks again for that information. Moving on, as part of the Building Access project with People and Disabilities Australia, they're printing the following easy read resources for services to order by the 16th of June. So option 1 is the handbook on supporting people with intellectual disability experiencing domestic and family violence. And option 2 is a pack of 3 easy read printed booklets about abuse, about sexual abuse, about how to report abuse or sexual violence to the police. Again, we're throwing the links in the chat box. The order deadline is the 16th of June. So once the resources packs are printed, they'll be mailed to your organisation to give your clients and or your community the distribution. So do let us know if you're keen, and there's hopefully what will have gone in the chat box is some information about how you order those resources. Finally, we invite you to register for the Domestic Violence New South Wales and the Country Women's Association Regional Forum on Tuesday, the 11th of July, 10 to 2. As most of you know, women living in regional, rural and remote areas who experience domestic and family violence face specific issues related to their geographical location and the cultural and social characteristics of living in those smaller communities. This annual regional forum will centre these issues, giving regional members at Domestic Violence New South Wales the opportunity to share ideas and perspectives. The focus of this year's forum is on family violence and disaster. Guest speakers at the forum include representatives from Gender Disaster Australia, Women Up North, Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association, ACHIA, and the Association of Children's Welfare, ACWA. So details are going in the chat box, and of course they're going into our weekly newsletter. If you want to hear more or register, we'd love you there. So now on to our guest speaker. I would like to introduce Dr. Hannah Tonkin. Hannah commenced as the inaugural New South Wales Women's Safety Commissioner in February 2023. And I can't believe how many months has passed by, Hannah, actually, and how they've flown, I'm sure, for you. In this role, she provides leadership and oversight on whole of government women's safety policy development and law reform, and works closely with the non-government sector to identify opportunities for systemic change. Previously, Hannah worked as an international human rights lawyer and policy advisor at the United Nations, as the Director of Disability Rights at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and as a barrister in London and Adelaide. While at the United Nations, Hannah worked in a range of conflict and post-conflict contexts around the world, including Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Gaza, Ukraine, and the former Yugoslavia. She holds a master's degree and PhD in international law from the University of Oxford in the UK, where she studied as a Rhodes Scholar, an honours degree in law and science from the University of Adelaide. Welcome, Commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Delia, for that kind introduction. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to connect with all of you. I know many of you on the line I've already met, but many of you I haven't met before. So this is a really great opportunity to connect with everyone across the whole of New South Wales. And thank you again to DV New South Wales for inviting me to have this opportunity today. I'll start by, first of all, just apologising a little bit. I've had a shocking cold the last couple of weeks, as probably many of you have as well. I know it's going around. So just excuse my voice if it does start to get a bit hoarse. I'll keep some water on hand. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm joining you from Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues joining us on the line today. Let me share my screen. I've just got a fairly broad brushstroke presentation. Most of what I say will be verbal, but just, can everyone see that? Yeah, excellent. So what I'd like to do today is essentially reflect on my first 4 months as the Women's Safety Commissioner. So I started on the 6th of February, actually, so it's exactly 4 months. And I will tell you a little bit about the Commissioner role. I'd like to talk about some of the emerging themes that I've been hearing from all of my consultations, both with the sector, with victim survivors in particular, and also with people in government, and potential priorities. And then we're going to have a very interactive session because I really want to hear from you. I'd like to get your feedback. So we have a Slido session. I'm a complete novice in this Slido business, so I'll hand over to Alice to do the technology side, but I can certainly lead that interactive session, and you'll have a chance for any general Q&A as well at the end. So I hope that this will be useful for you, and I certainly think it's going to be useful for me. So thanks again to everyone for joining. As Delia mentioned, the Women's Safety Commissioner, it's a new role. So I started in February this year, and the goal is to provide leadership and oversight across the whole of government in New South Wales, but also to connect across the whole system. So connecting government and the non-government sector, the private sector, the community. So to really have that leadership and oversight cross-sector on any women's safety initiatives. So particularly targeting domestic, family and sexual violence. My priority in the first few months was really to consult as widely as I could, focusing on sector leaders, frontline workers and victim survivors. So I've been really focusing on meeting as many people as possible. I've met with many people on this call or people from your organisation. I've met with a number of different victim survivors, including focusing on particular priority groups in the community. I've met with lots of stakeholders and with people across all different government agencies to try to really understand where the gaps are, where the opportunities are from that system perspective. And as you know, during the time since I started, we had a previous government, then we had caretaker period, and then we've got the current government. So we've had a lot of changes in government, and there have been 3 quite distinct periods. But now things have really settled down, and I think that we can move on to the next phase of really what are the priorities, and let's get started. So that's why today is going to be very, very useful. So in terms of the priorities, I'll take you through some of the thematic areas that have been coming out quite strongly in my work as Commissioner. And it's clear that there are a lot of areas in the system that need improvement. and I hear about this every day. Now I certainly can't do everything. I hope that I can contribute to meaningful change in some areas. So the key thing is, where can I add value? And that's what I want you to help me with, because I can't do everything. I hope that we can identify some areas where I could actually make a difference with this commissioner role. And so need to be a bit strategic and identify really concretely what are the best areas where I can focus my attention. So that would be great to get your input in that regard. So in terms of broad themes, these are sort of broad themes from a more system-wide perspective. Obviously, there are also particular issues that I'll talk about along the way that I can address, but primary prevention, the workforce, and I'm including sexual violence here. I think most of you on the call today are perhaps more on the domestic and family violence side, but also I'm addressing everything together today, although there are some differences in the different areas, of course, but I'll address everything as one for the sake of the talk today. Then system integration coordination. So how do we improve what we see in terms of fragmentation, silos, all of these things across the whole system? The justice system, so the courts, criminal justice, family courts, that's a big theme I often hear. And I'll talk a bit more about that later, whether I can contribute there and how. And then children and young people I've included. I'm not sure if it should be a priority area for me per se, but it is something that comes up a lot in my consultations in terms of children and young people as victim survivors in their own right. That was, of course, included in the national plan, but how do we implement that in practice in a really cross-cutting way? Because this is why I've included it from this system-wide perspective, because it's something that needs to really go across everything we do. So I'll talk about these 5 areas, and then also I'll flag some of the specific projects I'm doing on, in particular, more substantive, discrete areas of work that aren't so much system-wide focused. So starting with primary prevention. Oh, my slide's not working. There we go. So primary prevention. This, of course, is one of my main priorities as Commissioner, and it will be for the whole time that I'm in this role. This has come up in all of my consultations and discussions with everyone, that we need to address the drivers of violence against women. We need to prevent this occurring in the first place. Otherwise, we're never going to actually shift these numbers. That's not to say that we can't do more in response. Of course, there's still a lot of unmet need and demand in relation to crisis response, but we really need more investment in primary prevention if we're ever going to move the dial. I know that within government, around 85%, this is at least within DCJ, around 85% of funding goes to crisis response. So that's just huge. And we need to shift that, not to reduce the funding to crisis response, but to make sure that we have more in primary prevention. And we have a long way to go. We have made progress in some areas, but there's a long way to go in terms of really shifting those social norms away from the conditions that influence violence, to address the power imbalances, the structures, the practices that normalise violence. I've heard a lot of stories from victim survivors about people, the broader community, just accepting, condoning, dismissing abuse. It's normalised in many ways, and even taking a step back, not talking about abuse, but talking about disrespectful behaviour, because all essentially violence against women starts with disrespectful behaviour. So addressing that at an early stage, addressing that with young people, young children, in an age-appropriate way. I'm sure you're all familiar with the NCAS survey results that were released in March, the 2021 survey. Now, as you're probably aware, there was some signs of improvement in some attitudes, which is good, but we also saw some quite concerning results in some areas. So one that stood out to me was that 91% of respondents agreed that violence against women was a problem in Australia, but only 47% thought that it was a problem in their community. So that just shows people really don't understand that this is so widespread. It's a problem everywhere. It's not just, you know, other people. It's people in their suburb, their profession, their demographic. So that's an important message to get across. Also, many people don't understand the gendered nature of domestic and family violence. Another statistic that jumped out at me was that 41% believed the violence is perpetrated equally by men and women. But actually, we know that domestic violence in particular is perpetrated overwhelmingly by men. So that failure to understand the gendered impact and other interesting results, I'm sure you're aware, things like 34% believe that it's common for women to lie or grossly exaggerate claims of sexual assault. That's another really concerning finding, I thought, in terms of community attitudes. So these are just some examples of things we need to address in really tackling primary prevention. And so one area of focus in primary prevention needs to be to reach out to men and boys and really try to change the attitudes and behaviours of young men and boys in particular, and bring them on board as allies in the conversation. And that's one area I hope to address as Commissioner, among others. We all talk about the toxic influence of people like Andrew Tate and some of these other influences at the moment. It's very concerning. So how do we really counter this and reach communities on the ground? We need to be looking at grassroots organisations, community organisations, finding the leaders in the communities who are really resonating. In terms of the other thing I would say is just primary prevention, how crucial it is to tailor it to different groups. Of course, if we've got many intersectional approaches, multicultural groups, looking at who are the leaders who resonate with different communities, and really making sure we reach out to them and bring them on board. Multicultural communities, if programs need to be delivered in language, this needs to be funded. These are all part of the broader strategy. And also more generally addressing women and girls' economic independence will all feed into this, and economic security. So many of you will know that DCJ is currently working on the primary prevention strategy that's being developed as part of the New South Wales 5-year plans that were released at the end of last year. So I'll be feeding into that. They're currently doing some of the final consultations, and that will be released later this year. So it will be one key priority for me, is to oversee the implementation of that strategy, which Our Watch is leading, but also crucially how it's implemented on the ground. So we need to translate these high-level strategies that we're creating and really translate them on the ground at the community level, and that's the challenge, I think. So I've said a lot on prevention. I won't say as much on everything else. But another key area from a system perspective that I'm hearing about a lot is the challenges in domestic, family and sexual violence workforce in terms of capacity and capability. Excuse me. So this is more of a system enabler than a concrete, discrete, substantive area in itself. We know that it's a really tough market out there for the domestic, family and sexual violence sector. We know that there are great difficulties recruiting, training, retaining skilled specialists in this area. We need, just linking into what Delia was saying earlier about specialisation, there are so many areas where we need that specialisation, but it's hard to develop, it's hard to retain. And then how do we make sure that even within mainstream services as well, there's suitable training on domestic, family and sexual violence where that's needed for mainstream services, so that everything connects together in the workforce. Also, the sector these days is highly professionalised, so we need to approach it from that way. We need a pipeline of talent that's entering the workforce, university, TAFE, what needs to be done at that level to make sure that we have that professionalisation and that expertise in the sector, in the long term. We know that in terms of the mainstream versus specialist services, and I don't mean to put them in opposition, they're very much complementary. We know that many victim survivors will first interact with a mainstream service before they're referred on to a specialist service. Not always, but for some that's the path. So we need to make sure that these mainstream services, government agencies, that there's really good training there as well, and things like excuse me, having standing experts in certain police stations, for example, or other mainstream services, that we can connect the specialists with the generalists and make sure that adequate expertise is provided. Another key area for the workforce is more long-term contracting practices. I know that it does drive you all up the wall, the amount of time you have to spend applying for grants, competing with other organisations for grants, short-term contracts, short-term grants. It's very hard to develop the specialisation that you need to retain the specialisation. All of these, it's not sustainable. So basically we need more stability, more security in the sector. And that's just something I want to make sure that we can improve while I'm Commissioner from a system-wide perspective. And many of you would know that the New South Wales government, led by DCJ, is currently developing a workforce strategy, a 10-year workforce strategy. This is domestic family violence, and there's consultations happening on that at the moment. And hopefully we're also doing a survey at the moment, which will survey both specialist workers but also others who provide related services, including government agencies. So that will feed into the strategy, and hopefully that can all form part of how we can address some of these issues together. And really look forward to hearing your feedback on this today and in the coming months. So the third emerging theme, this is a big one, also more of a system enabler and very challenging, but a key one is to improve coordination and integration across the whole system. So government, non-government, community, everyone. I'm told, I'm not from New South Wales. Delia mentioned I'm from Adelaide. I've been told by many that New South Wales used to be a leader and perhaps is not anymore. I don't know if you agree with that. It's probably true in some areas and not in others, but that there's a sense that the system here now has become too fragmented. Maybe that was always the case, maybe it wasn't. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, but I'm certainly told that fragmentation of the system, lack of coordination, operating in silos, all of these things we talk about, they are a challenge and something I'd really like to address as Commissioner. And this includes looking at the governance mechanisms within government, making sure there's better mechanisms between government and the non-government sector, more transparency, more communication across the whole system, really. And how do we break this down so that a victim survivor can essentially move through the system on their journey seamlessly, that services really wrap around the victim survivor. They don't have to tell their story 100 times. They have that holistic approach from a system-wide perspective. That's really the goal. How do we achieve it? We obviously need better information sharing mechanisms, data collection. We have some good practices, we have the safety action meetings and various things like that are good examples of this wraparound whole system approach. How do we build on those and make them apply more generally across the system? And in all of these areas, a couple of things are key. One is intersectionality, so making sure that everything we do, whether it's training the workforce, whether it's making sure things are connected up in terms of services, how do we make sure we're addressing these different layers of individual characteristics, different opportunities for discrimination and disadvantage in the system? How do we address this? So really taking an intersectional approach, making sure that multicultural communities are served, that Aboriginal communities are served, that there are tailored approaches led designed by people in those communities at every step of the way. Excuse me. So that's another big challenge. And also making sure everything that's done for the victim survivor is trauma informed, of course. So that applies whether we're addressing the workforce challenges and the training that's needed in the workforce, or whether we're addressing the system coordination, the system-wide perspectives, really ensuring that we have that trauma-informed approach with the victim survivor at the centre every step of the way. Let's check the time. All right, I know I'm nothing. Keep moving. So the last two will be quick. So the justice system, this is a big area, of course, that I hear about a lot. So whether we're talking about the criminal justice system, whether we're talking about the family courts, it's really an opportunity that for many victim survivors, I hear that was an area that was essentially a source of significant trauma and re-traumatization for them in their journey. The family court in particular, but or for sexual violence survivors, the criminal court process. So there are various areas there where there needs to be improvements. I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of where would be some concrete areas that I might be able to contribute to as Commissioner, including keeping in mind the family court system's federal, and I'm New South Wales, but nonetheless I can certainly contribute to advocacy, and if we can identify some concrete priority areas within the court system that I could focus on, that would be really helpful for me to get your feedback on that. And finally, children and young people. As I said, this is really a cross-cutting area. I'd like to think about how we can better address children and young people in everything that we do across the whole system. So this is something I'm reflecting on in my role as Commissioner. How do we make sure they have their own individual responses and support, specialised services for them as victim survivors in their own right? I know that's a term that we often hear. What does it mean? How can it be implemented in practice? I think it's good that it's been recognised more and more now. We've still got a way to go to properly implement it in our systems. So I've been looking at this a bit within DCJ as a starting point, but I'd be curious to hear what you think about how we can do this better across the whole system. It might not be a separate priority area for me as Commissioner, but it might be more something that I keep in mind in everything that I do. But I'd welcome your feedback in that regard. So now, those are the 5 sort of broad cross-cutting themes that I've identified in my consultations. I also, of course, am looking at a number of discrete substantive areas of focus. So housing and homelessness, for example. Housing is a huge, huge problem, as you all know right now. It's the crux of so many other things, so many challenges for supporting victim survivors keep coming back to the shortage of housing that we have, or accommodation even at the moment. So that's certainly an area to address in terms of discrete substantive areas. Also women's economic security and empowerment more generally, knowing that these economic barriers are economic insecurity and lack of financial independence are such barriers to women to leave abusive relationships and often reasons for returning. So these are also areas I'd like to address in the course of my work as substantive areas of focus. I've also got some projects, just to give you a sense of what I'm doing, some other projects that I'm doing as a Women's Safety Commissioner along the way. So I've got one at the moment, for example, with Transport for New South Wales about improving women's safety in public spaces and on public transport. So that's a partnership that we're looking at in the coming months. That's just an example of something else sort of concrete that I'm doing. Also working with some other partners, just starting to do some work on forced marriage and domestic servitude with some other partner organisations and individuals. So these are some of the other types of projects I'll be doing along the way within my remit. And I'd welcome if you have other suggestions or opportunities for partnering or things like that, or areas where I could lend my voice to work that you're doing. Please do let me know. So for the sake of the rest of the session, we're going to move now to a Slido session, which Alice will lead on the technological side. Basically, we're going to ask for your feedback on those 5 areas, any comments that you have on those areas, and then there'll be an opportunity at the end as well to suggest other areas, to provide other comments and other feedback, and then also to ask just questions as well after we've done the Slido. So I'll hand over to Alice now to introduce the Slido, and then I'll talk you through it. Thanks.
Thanks, Hannah. So for those who haven't used Slido before, I've popped the link in the chat. You can either just click that link directly and you'll enter the Slido where everyone can add their thoughts to each question. You can also use the QR code in the corner of the screen and scan that on your phone, and the Slido will pop up. I'll wait to start until I see people jumping in. Let me know if you have any issues with the Slido as well. For those who just jump into slido.com, the code for this meeting is sector chats. So what we're really looking for is any insights or recommendations on the first theme of primary prevention, anything that you think we could leverage, any areas that we could focus on that Hannah didn't mention in her presentation, anything that you think she touched on that was really important to focus on more. Thanks to the 7 of those that are adding content. And all of these are anonymous.
Yes, anonymous.
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to
All of
clarify.
these are
It doesn't come up with who you are.
Yeah. So the first one, men's behaviour change, definitely agree with that one. Community engagement.
Community organisations.
We will also save these answers and have them for our future reference as well.
Yeah, that's a good point about the education department. We really need a whole state approach, not just school by school pilot programs here and there. This needs to be really system wide. Yeah, respectful relationships.
Yeah, and Hannah, I believe you're meeting with Consent Labs and Teach Us Consent on that issue.
Yes, tomorrow. Yeah, and with some colleagues in education as well. Yeah, I like that one on community research and evidence base on community messaging and framing to ensure prevention messages are towards positive action change. Yeah. That's so important, working out what messaging to use that really resonates with different communities and tailoring our messaging for the audience. Programs that already exist. Yeah, that's a good point as well about funding for programs that already exist. One thing I've noticed, I feel like we're often looking for shiny new things or reinventing the wheel when actually there's a lot. It's important to be open to new ideas, but there's a lot that's already been done, and whether in New South Wales or interstate or overseas, that we can improve, implement, continue instead of just having pilot after pilot of new ideas. So let's also look at what's already working and build on it. Affirmative consent. Yeah.
Great to see some examples of specific programs as well.
Yeah, the question about primary prevention strategy. So at the moment, there's no funding for implementation at the moment, but that's part of the budget proposals for this year. So we'll hopefully get some funding for implementation, but at the moment, it's nothing confirmed.
Great. There's only one more person typing, so once that response comes through, we can move on to the next question. Great.
research of the drivers of violence and LGBTQ. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. And as I said, we'll save these and refer to them in the future as well. So for the ones that we didn't touch on just now, we will have that information.
Alice, could you just scroll down just slowly, just so everyone can just see quickly before we move on what everyone's written? Yeah, would it be helpful? Thanks. Different communities, yeah. Need to start from daycare, fully agree. Yeah. Does everyone agree that this, I mean, I assume so from the responses, but that this should be one of my main priorities? People are nodding. Yeah, if in the coming slides when we're going through others, if you don't think it should be, flag that as well. Absolutely. For the other ones.
Right.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, the
Thanks,
next one is insights and recommendations on the theme of workforce capacity and capability.
This is a big one, and obviously if you have other comments in the coming weeks and months, you can share them as well separately. This isn't your only chance. Yeah, salaries, yeah, absolutely. It's true. This needs to be a career path for life if people want, not the stop start. Yeah, based on funding. Absolutely. The status. Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be treated as the professionalised sector that it is and promoted in that way. It needs to have that status, that salary, and those pipelines. This is me commenting because I'm not reading anything out now. Those pipelines into entry in terms of training and trauma-informed, culturally competent workforce is critical. Absolutely. Yeah. Ongoing training, lifelong professional development. Better job security. Yeah, absolutely. There's so much burnout in the sector. This is me speaking now, not reading again. After COVID, especially, it's just to link funding allocations. Yeah.
Vicarious trauma is a great point too. Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, where's that one? I didn't.
It's here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, vicarious trauma and burnout, absolutely. I think we're only just starting to feel the impact of COVID in the sector too. There must just be so much burnout across the whole sector who basically were emergency workers for much of that period. Map out what career progression can look like in this area. Absolutely. Yeah, marginalised communities, additional support. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Aboriginal social work students drop out because they can't afford the study. Yeah. Generous caseload, burnout, vicarious. It's a good point about the specialisation in the sector. And sorry, my 2-year-old's calling out in the background. Clear development pathway. Yeah. In all legal degrees. Yeah, that's something I was discussing recently actually, was including in law degrees there's one university that's looking at doing a study at the moment on what's currently provided in law degrees around the country in terms of this sort of training, and I think that's important as well as not just in social work or other courses, but lawyers who come out with an understanding of trauma and domestic family and sexual violence. Okay, I think I've got 2 more still.
Yeah. Might just wait for these 3 to finish typing so we capture the information and then move to the next one.
Yeah.
Because of time.
Yeah. Regional rural workers, absolutely. Yeah. Mandatory unit in all home human services professional qualifications. Yeah, so I'm seeing just how important it is right from university TAFE training all the way to the end of someone's career to have this lifelong approach to the sector and treating it as that professionalised lifetime sector that it is and that it could be for many who they're not leaving because of burnout or short-term funding. How do we really foster that? Give it the status that it needs. Okay, thanks, Alice. I think we can move on because of timing.
Thank you. The next one is the DFE sector integration and coordination.
Another big one. Yeah, that's such a good point. I hear all the time. DFS, we sort of lump together, and then the sexual violence is under-resourced, doesn't get that specialist attention that we need. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Yeah. Areas where they cross over, but areas where there's specialist silos. Yeah, definitely the silos between government and non-government is such a big one. The journey, yeah, the victim survivor journey, pain points across, yeah. Safe for people experiencing violence and how information is shared. Just generally streamlining processes, reducing paperwork just in general. It's DBCAS, yeah. Some confusion. Okay, I'll look into that. Systems approach, specialist providers, systems approach across the sector. Yeah. Place-based training, definitely. Absolutely, victim survivors should not have to explain their situation at every touch point. It's so true. We've got this sort of one story principle, but it doesn't seem to be working. Tell your story once. Coordination across regions. Yeah, collaborate. Tackling subversive control. No wrong doors should be across any funding stream. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Just how the structures are set up in terms of funding streams and other structures ends up filtering down to this silo effect on the ground. Yep, service hubs, absolutely. Locally, we found service hubs to be very effective in a one-stop shop model. You've been thinking about that, how to expand that model in a more on a broader approach. Okay, we'll just take the last few. The sector is safe, coordination. Yeah. Yeah, that's true about the connection between the previous, the sector and the system. Better collaborate. Yeah, a risk assessment. This is something that DCJ is just starting now, is the multi-agency risk assessment framework. We're behind the rest of the country on this, as most of you would know. So that's something that is being worked on now or starting soon. Okay, I think we need to move on. So
the next question, because of the base Slido subscription, we had to merge justice system and children and young people. So apologies for that. Maybe just put justice or children and young people at the beginning of your answer so we can specify. This is the second last question, so we'll have one more after this.
Yeah, so we've just merged these two. We're also at 10:48, so we maybe it's better anyway because of time but we can spend a bit more time on this one because it is two questions rolled into one. You could probably say a lot just on the family court system by itself, I'm sure. Yeah. So a lot of it comes back on the children and young people, comes back to just training and adequate resourcing across the sector. And yeah, leaving violence. Yeah, that's a good point about the young survivors who are also young perpetrators and who end up in the justice system. So we're just perpetuating the intergenerational cycles of violence if we're not addressing the issue of children and young people. They're so invisible within our systems. Yeah. Systemic misidentification, absolutely. So it's true, this is a big issue in the court system, the justice system, but it's not just in the justice system. Yeah, it's across all areas. Yeah, systems abuse, especially in First Nations communities. Yeah, absolutely. And I was really grateful to DV New South Wales for the special forum they had on misidentification a few weeks ago, or a month ago. Yeah, the hearing support pilots. Yeah, the importance of this. Okay. Specific programs to support people through the justice system. Yep. And training, trauma-informed justice system. Yep. Young people with homelessness. Yeah. That's an interesting point. Integrating services for children and young people alongside. Yeah. So a lot of this comes back to the system design and the training. DV doesn't. Yeah, lip service, the children as victim survivors in their own right, that it's sort of lip service at the moment, and how do we actually implement that? Yeah. just take the last few and yeah. Yeah, working with police, definitely.
Great. Are we happy
Okay.
to move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think we need to in the interest of time. Yeah.
Mhm. So this question is a word puzzle. So try and use one word if you can. And we will start to see hopefully some repetitions on recommendations for themes and priorities that weren't discussed today.
Funding, yeah, absolutely. Innovative, simple messaging, systemic, community.
If you see any on screen that you agree with, you can just type that word in and it'll start to get bigger and we'll get an idea of the preferences out of the group.
Collaboration. Systemic discrimination, yeah. I think we'll just give it another 30 seconds and then wrap up. Systemic racism, yeah, absolutely. Housing's a bit massive one. Behaviour change programs, yeah. Specialisation, yeah. Funding. Education. All right, we might draw a line there, just all right. Thank you so much, everyone. That's extremely useful for me. I hope it's useful for those of you on the call as well. And like I said, it's certainly not the end of this conversation. I'd love to keep hearing your feedback in the coming weeks and months in different ways. Delia, do you have final things you wanted to say to close the meeting, or do we just want to have some general questions? It's up to you how you want to finish.
I think we'd love general questions, but I'm not sure we've got time is the only thing, Hannah. So what I was going to suggest, I'm sure the members would probably agree, is that we maybe have like a regular catch up with you with our DV&SW members and yourselves, where we can make sure we're kind of getting regular updates and we can address some of the kind of get a feedback loop on some of the items discussed today.
Yeah.
DV&SW would love the Slido feedback as well, so that we can make sure that those are key advocacy pieces for us. Yeah. And Alice, one awesome tool that you found for free. I think we'll be stealing that one. But I think the members would probably want a Q&A session at some point. So maybe a follow-up would be great. Yeah. Just while the members are here, I just want to obviously note that we have advocated on those 20 specialist workers. I know, Hannah, you would have got that letter to us and the minister as urgent. We do want to continue that work, and we know it's beyond those 20 specialist workers. And I know that certainly those of you sat here are thinking, well, hang on, we had funding for children's workers before the reforms in 2014. So we want that back on the table. And again, the victims in their own right, but ensuring there's recovery and therapeutic support and responses for children, I think is absolutely key. And just a quick one on the misidentification. The team have been working away furiously on some really solid actions on that. But obviously, as you'll imagine, it's complex to make sure we can go to government with something that's really solid and constructive. So we will be in touch with everybody on that. But Hannah, that was incredible. I think what we're seeing, which we're loving, is the meaningful engagement and the consultation opportunities that you're providing our sector, and it's certainly valued. And I know that we would definitely welcome regular catch-ups with you as appropriate. Team members, if there are ongoing questions you've got for Hannah or the team, email admin@dvnsw.org.au. We are meeting with the Commissioner monthly to discuss the issues that you bring to us. So you've got admin@dvnsw.org.au, and just a huge thank you for hearing those key themes. And I know how passionate you are, because I know we've had many a discussion. And I think the system reform piece is going to be really important. I think from DVNSW's perspective, the lack of a kind of clear pathway for victim survivors makes us all feel quite pained, knowing that everyone's working so hard. And it would be wrong of me not to recognise the child that we know allegedly lost their life last week. And I know that's going to be tough for all of us doing really life-saving responsive work. So I really want to acknowledge how tough it is at the moment to do our work. And I thank everyone for their support and their commitment and their passion and the life-saving work that you do. So more to do together, but huge thank you to Hannah. Please keep the conversation going, everybody. And we thank you for coming today.